He curated art that was celebrated, yet felt hollow. She wove life itself, yet her masterpieces were dismissed as mere souvenirs. In a world where art became branding, a disillusioned curator's desperate escape would lead him to a remote shop, and a forgotten tapestry that shattered his carefully constructed reality, revealing beauty he'd never imagined. The old loom, her great-grandmother's, groaned with each pass of the shuttle. It was a sound Kaya Little Elk knew better than her own heartbeat. At 58, she was one of the last weavers of the Ashori people, and her hands, weathered and wise, moved with an inherited grace. Her latest work, River's Memory Asterisk, lay folded on her lap. It wasn't just a tapestry, it was an archive. 3 months of her life had been woven into a cascade of grays and blues, a spectrum she had coaxed from roots, clay, and wild berries. The threads mapped the river's flow through 4 seasons, chronicling its moods alongside the half-forgotten stories of her tribe. The hour-long drive to the tourist town of North Fork was a slow descent from the sacred to the profane. She carried her work into Mountain Breeze Souvenirs, a shop cluttered with the scent of pine-scented candles and cheap varnish. Hal, the owner, squinted at the piece. "It's dark, Kaya," he said, his voice practical. "Tourists, they want bright, happy colors." He offered her $150. It was an insult, but it was also the money she needed for next month's electricity bill and a new supply of flax thread. She watched in silence as he took her masterpiece and hung it carelessly between a rack of glossy postcards and a row of grinning wooden bears. Driving home, rain lashed against her old truck's windshield. The wipers fought a losing battle, smearing the world into a blur of weeping green and gray. It was a familiar feeling, a deep, quiet loneliness that settled in her bones, the sense that she and her art were becoming ghosts. Her culture, her history, all of it felt like that old loom, a sacred, intricate thing slowly coming apart at the seams, its value understood by no one. Meanwhile, in a Seattle gallery washed in a sterile, almost surgical white light, Rowan Vance stood at the epicenter of his own creation. At 42, he was the Golden Boy curator of the Seattle Museum of Modern Art, SMAM. And tonight was the opening of his latest, most lauded exhibition, Monochrome Meditations. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, self-congratulatory hum of the city's cultural elite. He accepted a glass of champagne he didn't want, his smile feeling like a mask he'd forgotten how to take off. He gazed at the show's centerpiece, a vast canvas titled Asterisk Untitled 11 Absence Asterisk, which was, in essence, a meticulously painted shade of off-white. He had written the catalog essay himself, a masterful exercise in intellectual acrobatics, weaving in phrases like post-structuralist dialectic and the sublime void. The words, which had secured him grants and glowing reviews, now tasted like ash in his mouth. He remembered being a student, standing breathless before a Rothko, feeling the raw, vibrating power of color. Now, he sold wealthy patrons on the genius of its absence. The art world, once a universe of passion, had shrunk into a gilded cage of theory and commerce. Rowan, magnificent. A portly collector named Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, his voice booming with the confidence of new money. The market for this kind of conceptual minimalism is white-hot. It has the same scarcity appeal as a top-tier NFT, but with institutional validation. "I'm acquiring number 11. Rowan forced his smile to hold. "I'm glad it resonates with you, Marcus." "Resonates? It's a masterstroke of branding. You've made beige feel revolutionary." The word struck Rowan with physical force. Branding. That was all it was. He looked past Marcus's shoulder at the room full of people not seeing art but assets, not feeling emotion but calculating future auction prices. A wave of nausea, potent and undeniable, rose in his throat. He excused himself, walked straight past the valet and out into the cool, damp Seattle night. The next morning, he emailed his assistant a single sentence, taking a personal leave for 2 weeks. He got into his car and started driving north, with no plan but to lose himself in the chaotic, unapologetic green of the Olympic Peninsula. He was starving for something real, something with texture and dirt, and a story that didn't need a PhD to be understood. The escape he sought was delivered with the full force of a Pacific Northwest squall. The sky, a bruised and churning purple, opened up, unleashing a torrent that blurred the world outside his windshield into a primal chaos. The highway became a treacherous black mirror, and his sleek German sedan, a symbol of his curated Seattle life, felt fragile and utterly out of place. An exit sign, ghostly green in the headlights, materialized from the deluge. A Shorey Point Pop 212. It wasn't on his GPS. It felt less like a town and more like a rumor. He wrenched the wheel, his tires hissing a protest as he veered onto a side road that led to a single street of weathered storefronts, huddled together like old men in the rain. He parked in front of the only sign of life, a flickering neon sign that read Mountain Breeze Souvenirs. The chime of the doorbell was a tinny, forlorn sound. The air inside was a suffocating assault on the senses, a cloying mix of damp wool, artificial pine, and the sweet rot of old wood. It was a cathedral of kitsch. His eyes scanned the shelves, seeing a tragic caricature of a culture. Mugs with grinning eagles, plastic totem poles stamped, "Made in China," racks of t-shirts bearing slogans like "I got lost in the woods and I liked it." It was everything he was running from, just a cruder, more honest version of the commodification he practiced in his white-walled gallery. He felt a fresh wave of despair, and was about to retreat into the storm when his gaze sought refuge from the garish colors, landing on a patch of shadow in a far corner. And there it was, Kaya's tapestry, River's memory asterisk. At first, it was just a dark, somber rectangle, an anomaly in the room's forced cheerfulness. But something pulled him closer, an instinct he thought he had lost. As he neared, he could smell it, not pine but lanolin, earth, and the faint, clean scent of river water after a rain. He stood before it, and the world outside, the rain, the tacky shop, all of it fell away. The curator in him, the real one, the boy who had once been silenced by beauty, awoke with a violent jolt. He saw what Hal the shopkeeper had never seen. He saw what generations of tourists would ignore. The seemingly random blocks of gray and blue were a language, a breathtakingly complex visual grammar that was both fiercely intelligent and profoundly organic. His trained eye, accustomed to deconstructing canvases, began to decipher its code. He saw fractal patterns mirroring the branching of river deltas. He recognized what looked like a Lindenmayer system, a mathematical algorithm used to model plant growth, woven into a border depicting the unfurling of ferns. The subtle shifts in color were not merely aesthetic, they were data. This dark, turbulent band was the precise record of a spring flood. That cluster of pale, silvery threads mapped the slow, shallow current of late August. He thought instantly, powerfully, of Agnes Martin. He had built a career on explaining the genius of her abstract grids, but her grids were a retreat from the world into a serene, intellectual void. This was the world itself. It was a living theorem. It had the weight of mud, the memory of salmon runs, the cold of glacial melt in its very fibers. It was an algorithm born not in a computer, but in a soul that was in deep, constant conversation with the earth. His hands were trembling. An excitement so pure it felt like a form of pain seized him. He turned to the man behind the counter, who was now engrossed in a crossword puzzle. "This piece," Rowan said, his voice husky, almost reverent. "The artist. I need to know who she is." Hal looked up, his expression a mask of profound indifference. "Oh, that," he grunted, clicking his pen. "Just some old Indian woman who lives up in the hills. Kaya brings one in every few months. They don't sell much. Too, I dunno, brown." "How much?" Rowan asked, his voice low and steady. Hal blinked. "For that, I told you it's a tough sell. I've had it for a week. How about 120? "I'll give you $1,000 for it," Rowan said, pulling a worn leather wallet from his jacket. He counted out 10 crisp $100 bills. Hal's jaw went slack, his eyes wide with a mixture of suspicion and greed. He took the money as if it might burn him. "And I need the artist's name and address," Rowan added, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving the world smelling of wet earth and pine. Rowan's car, now caked in mud, navigated a road that was more of a suggestion than a reality. He followed Hal's crudely drawn map on a napkin, pushing deeper into the forest until he reached a small, secluded clearing. There a curl of wood smoke rose from the chimney of a modest cedar cabin. He found Kaya outside, splitting kindling with a steady, powerful rhythm. She was a woman with a face like carved cedar, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight braid. Her eyes, when they landed on him, were as wary and ancient as the mountains at her back. She straightened up, resting the axe head on the chopping block, her posture a silent question. He didn't approach with a broad, city smile. Instead, he held up the carefully rolled tapestry like a peace offering. "Kaya Little Elk." She gave a single, curt nod. Her gaze flickered to his expensive car, then back to his face, her expression hardening. She had seen this before. The wealthy outsider, hunting for an authentic trophy. "I bought this at the shop in town," Rowan began, his voice quiet, respectful. He unrolled the weaving, holding it taut between his hands. "I'm not here to buy more. I'm here because I need to understand." He pointed to a specific, intricate pattern near the center. "This spiral here," he said, his finger hovering just above the threads. "It isn't just decorative. It follows a logarithmic sequence, like the unfurling of a fern frond. It's a Fibonacci spiral, isn't it?" He then traced a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the blues along the bottom edge. "And this color change, it's too precise to be random. Is this? Are you mapping the change in salinity where the glacial melt from the mountains finally meets the estuary?" The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the drip of water from a fir branch. Kaya stared at him, the suspicion in her eyes dissolved, replaced by a profound, shimmering disbelief. For 50 years, people had called her work pretty or interesting. No one, not once, had ever read the language. No one had seen the math, the science, the soul of it. A breath she didn't know she was holding escaped her lips in a soft sigh. The tension left her shoulders. For the first time she truly looked at him, and for the first time she felt seen. You should come inside," she said, her voice raspy with emotion. She led him not into the main cabin, but to a small, cluttered workshop. It was a sacred chaos of hanging herbs, looms of different sizes, and skeins of yarn in 100 shades of earth. Pinned to the walls were not sketches, but what looked to Rowan like complex star charts and meteorological diagrams, the blueprints of a living world. For the next 3 days, Rowan didn't check his phone. He forgot about the museum, the art market, the entire world he had fled. He was an apprentice again, sitting in the quiet awe of a true master. Kaya, in turn, opened up like a flower to the sun. She showed him how she boiled lichens to achieve a specific, mossy gray, how the spacing between certain threads corresponded to the lunar cycle, how a single, rogue red thread in a field of green represented the first salmon returning to the river. He realized he wasn't looking at art asterisk about asterisk nature. He was looking at nature's autobiography, transcribed through Kaya's hands. This was not craft. It was a discipline as rigorous and profound as any in the art historical canon. It was data visualization. It was mathematical art. It was cultural preservation. It was everything the art world claimed to value, but in a form it was too blind to recognize. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire, Rowan felt a conviction solidifying in his chest, a purpose so clear and bright it almost scared him. "Kaya," he said, his voice charged with a nervous energy, "I want to give you a show." She smiled faintly. "I've had my work in the county fair. It won a blue ribbon once." "No," Rowan leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I mean a real show, at the Seattle Museum of Modern Art, where I work." Kaya stared at him, then let out a short, bitter laugh. "My dusty old weavings, in your big glass box in the city, they would look foolish." No, Kaya, Rowan insisted, his voice rising with passion. They would look honest, they would look essential. I don't want to put you in a native arts wing or some anthropological exhibit. I want to put your work in the main gallery. I want to hang River's memory right next to an Agnes Martin. I want to create a dialogue, a conversation between your living, breathing grids and her silent, minimalist ones. I want to show them what a grid can be when it has a soul. The sheer audacity of the idea silenced her. She looked from Rowan's fiercely earnest face to the loom in the corner, the silent keeper of her lineage. The thought was terrifying, impossible, but it also planted a seed of a question she hadn't dared to ask herself in decades. What if? Rowan returned to Seattle a changed man. He walked into the Monday morning board meeting, his jeans still flecked with mud, and made his pitch. The proposal was met with stunned silence, followed by a wave of polite but firm resistance. Rowan, this is unconventional, said Eleanor Vance, the board's chairwoman, no relation. We have a brand to protect. We can't just hang folk art next to a Rothko. It confuses the narrative. It doesn't confuse the narrative, Eleanor, Rowan countered, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. It is the narrative. It's the narrative we've been ignoring. This is not folk art. This is sublime, conceptual work that predates the very movements we celebrate. If we are too arrogant to see that, then what is the point of this museum? The debate was fierce. They called it a risk, a gimmick, a career-ending folly. Finally, Rowan played his only card. Do this, he said, his gaze sweeping across the boardroom table. Give me the main gallery for this show. If it fails, if the critics mock us, I will tender my resignation the next day. The opening night of Woven Algorithms, Kaya Littlelk and the Modern Grid, was unlike any Rowan had ever curated. The usual crowd was there, the critics, the collectors, the artists, but the air crackled with a different kind of energy, a mix of intense curiosity and deep skepticism. Kaya stood in the center of the vast, white gallery, feeling as though she had been transplanted to another planet. She wore a traditional wool shawl she had woven herself, its deep indigo a stark contrast to the room's asceticism. She felt small and terribly exposed under the glare of the track lighting. Her 5 largest works, including River's Memory Asterisk, were mounted on the walls with the reverence usually reserved for sainted relics. They looked magnificent, their textures and subtle colors alive under the focused beams. On the opposing wall hung the cool, calculated grids of Agnes Martin and the stark, color-filled voids of Mark Rothko. The conversation Rowan had envisioned was now a reality, silent and profound. At first, the guests drifted, observing her work with polite but distant interest. They read the wall labels Rowan had painstakingly written, which explained not just the cultural history but the mathematical underpinnings of each piece. Then, a shift began to happen. People stopped drifting. They leaned in closer. Conversations dropped to a whisper. Kaya watched as a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, a famous art critic from New York whose face she recognized from a magazine, stood before River's memory for a full 10 minutes completely still. The critic then turned to her companion, and Kaya overheard her words, clear as a bell in the hushed room. "My God, it's living mathematics," the critic murmured, her voice filled with genuine wonder. Agnes Martin's grids were a search for tranquility and escape from the world. This is the world, it sings. A tear, hot and sudden, escaped Kaya's eye and traced a path down her weathered cheek. Then another. They weren't tears of sadness or even just joy. They were tears of release. A lifetime of quiet, unacknowledged work, of being seen as a curiosity, of feeling her heritage fade into a souvenir. All of it was being washed away in the warmth of this bright, sterile room. She wasn't just being seen as an artist. Her ancestors were being honored, their wisdom finally understood in a language she had kept alive with her own 2 hands. Across the room, Rowan watched her. He didn't approach. This moment was hers alone. He saw the tears on her face, and he felt a sense of rightness so profound it was like a physical weight settling in his soul. In fighting for her, he had found his own way back. He had remembered that art wasn't about branding or investment. It was about connection. It was about one human soul reaching out through time and space and saying, "I was here. I saw this, and it was beautiful." The exhibition was more than a success. It was a phenomenon. A rave review in the New York Times asterisk, headlined "The Weaver Who Remapped Modernism," sent shockwaves through the art world. Museums from across the country called, clamoring to host the show. Collectors who had once scoffed were now on waiting lists, offering astronomical sums for her work. Kaya, however, accepted very few of the offers. The money, when it came, felt abstract, far less real than the weight of wool in her hands. She used the bulk of it to create the Ashari Weaving Heritage Foundation. She bought 3 new, state-of-the-art looms and a lifetime supply of the finest threads. She converted the Old Town Community Hall into a bright, airy workshop and began offering free classes to the children and teenagers of her tribe, ensuring the language of the loom would not die with her. Her grandmother's old loom, the one that had groaned under the weight of her worries, was carefully restored. She placed it in a sunlit corner of her own workshop, not as a tool anymore, but as an honored elder, a silent witness to the journey. The story ends not in a gallery, but back in her cabin. Sunlight streams through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Kaya sits at one of the new looms, its action smooth and silent. Her hands, wrinkled but full of a calm, certain power, move across the threads. She is no longer weaving to pay the bills or to fight against obscurity. She is weaving for the pure, unadulterated joy of creation. On the wall beside her, a new diagram is pinned, a complex series of swirls and lines. It is the beginning of her next work, a piece she is calling "The Shape of the Wind." Rowan, for his part, never curated another show of minimalist art. He became the museum's head of a new department he created himself, vernacular arts and hidden modernisms. He now traveled the country, not looking for the next big thing, but for the quiet, brilliant things that had been there all along. The ripple of their unlikely friendship, born from a single tapestry in a dusty souvenir shop, was flowing outward, nourishing dry ground and changing the course of more than one river.